Today on thetruthaboutcars.com, we are out here taking a look at the 2015 Mercedes-Benz GLA 250. Now, the GLA 250 was designed as Mercedes' least expensive crossover vehicle in the United States. Some people get a little confused where the GLA fits in the grand scheme of things, so let's go over that. This competes with the Audi Q3, the Range Rover Evoque, and the BMW X1. This does not necessarily compete with the Lexus NX, the Volvo XC60, or the Lincoln MKC, because those are larger vehicles than this, and these are actually about the same size as the Mercedes-Benz GLC, which is the next size category up in the Mercedes line. Although the average entry in that segment is between 10 and 12 inches longer than this, and the MKC is just about 7 inches longer, that's still a pretty big size difference. I think the GLA is actually the most attractive entry in this segment. This front end really checks all the right boxes for me. Now, unfortunately, HID headlamps are not standard like our model has right here. They are optional, and you will find them standard on the Q3. Attractive design cues continue out back where we get this low and wide design, which again, I think is the most attractive in this category. Again, unfortunately, the attractive LED tail lamps that we have in our particular model are not standard, they are optional, and we do get somewhat limited visibility out of the small rear glass. Overall, this is definitely the sexiest entry in this category. From a design perspective, in order to make the proportions of the CLA sedan work properly, they actually gave it quite a large trunk, and that means that we don't really get that much more cargo room in the GLA than we do in the CLA. The GLA 250's engine produces 208 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque, and the GLA 45 AMGs produces a whopping 355 horsepower and 332 pound-feet of torque. Now, an interesting bit of trivia for me is that the GLA 45 AMG's engine is still just turbocharged. It's not turbocharged and supercharged like we see in certain new Volvo models that are producing over 300 horsepower from just 2 liters. As often happens, sexy comes at a price, and that price is relatively limited rear seat accommodations. I do have a decent amount of legroom back here, but headroom is relatively limited in the GLA, and entering and exiting the vehicle is a little bit more difficult by a relatively high sill and a relatively low opening for the door. Now again, I have to say that's not necessarily a knock on the GLA 250 because basically every entry in this segment has very small doors. It's the only way to jam 4 of them in a vehicle this size. It is a little bit easier to enter and exit this back seat than the Q3, however, because in the Q3, the seat back is actually pushed a little bit behind the door opening and you actually have to climb out over it. In terms of overall style, the GLA borrows very heavily from the CLA, which is Mercedes' small sedan. So we do have this large, soft touch upper section of the dashboard. It can optionally be done in stitched imitation leather. And our model has the optional wood trim right here, which is definitely an option that I would get. It really dresses the cabin up quite a bit. We have these very interesting circular air vents. I really like them because you can easily point them in every direction, and you can turn them off by rotating them sideways in that fashion. Although a larger screen will be standard for 2016, navigation will remain optional. Moving down from that, you can see we have those 3 large air vents right there, and you'll notice that we do not have keyless go in the 2015 model. That will be a change for 2016 as well, where we will get keyless go standard. Zooming out to the steering wheel, you can see it is this very attractive 3-spoke steering wheel with very aggressive sport grips on the top right there. That is something that I missed in the Audi Q3. We also have shift paddles on the back of the steering wheel, up on the right and down on the left. We have dedicated phone hang-up pickup, mute buttons, volume up-down button, and a voice command button that does nothing in our particular model. We also have this perforated grip section on the steering wheel right over there, and you can see that it is a round 3-spoke design. The seat is quite comfortable, and it gets an improvement for 2016 with that extending thigh cushion. We have a multi-way adjustable driver's seat that is memory linked, and the headrest is even powered right over there. We also have a 4-way adjustable lumbar support, which I really appreciate. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column with a moderate range of motion. Out on the road, the GLA 250 really does drive like a hatchback version of the CLA. Now that is to say that it's going to be a little bit more muted in terms of overall feel. It's going to feel a little bit bigger, a little bit more body roll, a little bit more tip and dive than we find in the CLA 250. It's also going to be a hair slower. That said, it is still one of the fastest entries in this segment at 6.6 seconds 0 to 60 in our tests, and about 4.8 seconds in the AMG 45, we're told. Braking feel is also excellent in this model thanks to decently sized brakes and relatively grippy tires. Now, if we get the AMG version of this vehicle, we don't get any wider tires, unfortunately. We just get grippier tires. And therefore, the braking scores in the Q3 are actually going to be better in terms of distance in most models compared to this GLA. Fade resistance is another matter, and if you get the performance brake package in this vehicle, it will beat that Audi. Handling is a little bit of a split score. The overall handling feel is absolutely excellent in this vehicle, but the actual handling numbers are not as good as the Audi, all thanks to those extra wide tires we get in the Audi. I would actually say that the handling feel is almost the equal of the BMW X1. The X1 has a really great rear-wheel drive feel. It's very chuckable, it's very light, it has that solid rear-wheel drive dynamic. This obviously doesn't get the rear-wheel drive dynamic, but it does feel very connected to the driver. The steering ratio is really quick, and we also get a decent amount of feedback from the front wheels, even though this is front-wheel drive and we have electric power steering. The downside to that handling prowess is the ride, and this suspension can feel less polished than the X1, the Evoque, or the Audi out on the road. It's especially noticeable on rough pavement in the corners where the suspension can feel a little bit crashy and a little bit unsettled at times. Cabin noise also suffers in the GLA. Although this is a hair quieter than the CLA, this is still one of the louder entries in this particular segment. It's actually a little bit louder even than certain mass market crossover vehicles I've tested recently. Helping redeem things a little bit is the fuel economy, which is absolutely excellent. I've been able to get around 25 miles per gallon driving this car like I stole it. The EPA says we should get right around that number, and if you treat it very gently out on the highway, you can get over 30 miles per gallon without a problem. Keep in mind we are in the all-wheel drive version, and the front-wheel drive version will get even better fuel economy. The most surprising thing, however, is that AMG 45 version will actually get almost as good fuel economy, even though we're getting over 350 horsepower. If you're more about handling feel than absolute grip, the GLA 45 is the vehicle for you. If you're after grip, then the Q3 is probably the better choice. The Q3 steering is just a little bit slower. It's not quite as tight, not quite as communicative, not quite as direct as we get here. However, it does hold the road a little bit better than this. It's really noticeable out on these sweeping curves right here, where these tires are protesting just a little bit as we go around this corner. Definitely could go faster in the Q3. Pricing for 2015 starts at $31,300 for the GLA 250, add $2,000 for all-wheel drive. Now that sounds low, but you do have to be careful with your options, because although this starts around a well-priced Ford Escape or a Hyundai Tucson, it will rapidly get up to nearly $50,000. Base models do not come with leather for 2015. We also don't get standard dual-zone climate control, navigation, or any of those things that you may find in a mass market vehicle at the same price point. Leather will set you back $1,700, the two-zone climate control system with heated seats and a few other options, $2,300. We then have the sport package for $2,200 that improves the braking in the vehicle with cross-drilled rotors, etc. Radar cruise control for $2,500, and if you want navigation, it is quite spendy at $2,400, but at least you do get a backup camera. Now, once you've added all those options onto your GLA 250, it's about $10,000 more than something like a Hyundai Tucson. Of course, this handles better than a Tucson. It feels an awful lot more fun and more premium, but you actually will find more options and more features in a Tucson that's $10,000 less. Depending on the options you add to your GLA 250, it can be either a little bit cheaper than an Audi Q3 or a decent amount more expensive. The Q3 starts a little bit higher than this, but it actually includes a decent amount more standard equipment, like standard leather, again, that you don't find in this particular model. As always, pricing is relative, and this can be between $8,000 and $10,000 less expensive than a Range Rover Evoque. Now, the more options you add to your GLA 250, the closer the Evoque and the GLA will get together in terms of overall price tag. Now, the Range Rover Evoque is right around the same size. We don't really get that much more room on the inside or in the cargo area, but we get more ability to customize the interior. I think the interior overall is a slightly nicer place to spend your time. Something like a Lincoln MKC, a Volvo XC60, or a Lexus NX will give you more vehicle for not too much more. Can be actually about the same price depending on how you configure those models. I think my favorite vehicle in this segment, however, is the Audi Q3. It's not as fast as the GLA 250 by a decent margin. However, it handles incredibly well. That's thanks to the 255 width tires we find on a large percentage of those Q3 models. They're available as an option on the base model, bundled relatively frequently according to the dealer inventories around me, and standard on the top end trim of that Q3. It makes it handle like it's on rails. This particular vehicle, 235 width tires are the widest you can get, and even the GLA 45 AMG, although it uses stickier rubber, they don't get any wider. That means that although the Q3 is heavier, it still handles better. And of course, if you put sticky rubber on it, it would seriously outhandle the GLA-45. The Q3 is also a little bit less expensive, and although I think it's plainer on the inside and on the outside, it's also more practical. We get a slightly more practical cargo area, we definitely get a more practical and more usable back seat, more headroom, a little bit more legroom, slightly more comfortable as well. And I think all of those things together mean that it would be my choice. Now that's my personal preference because I prefer the vehicle that handles better to the vehicle that's faster. And if you want a faster vehicle, there really isn't anything faster in this segment than that GLA-45 AMG. It is seriously, seriously quick. It's a decent amount faster than even the 3-liter turbocharged version of the BMW X1. Go ahead and check out thetruthaboutcars.com for news, reviews, and more, and of course the upcoming full written review on this GLA-45. I'll see you next week.